Hello and welcome to another TLDR video. Next week, the UK and EU are set to start negotiating their future relationship. So in this video, we're going to explain what the UK's negotiating standpoint is, and what it generally means for the negotiations going forward. Now, if you're getting a sense of deja vu, yes, we have technically already covered this in another video. However, since Johnson's speech and written statement, the government has published a much more substantive document entitled The Future Relationship with the EU, the UK's Approach to Negotiations, which fleshes out some of the underdeveloped details from last time round. Before we dive into all the details that the government's now provided, I wanted to encourage you to follow us across our other social accounts. We have a Twitter, Facebook and Instagram, where we let you know about our latest posts, as well as sharing exclusive additional content. Find us across other social networks simply by searching for TLDR News. So, what does this new document outline? Well, the document is broken up into three main parts: the Comprehensive Free Trade Agreement, other agreements, and technical and other processes beyond the scope of the future relationship negotiations. First things first, it's made clear that the UK is not looking for as close a relationship with the EU as some would like, making it clear that the UK will no longer be part of the EU single market or the EU customs union, with the government asserting that the vision for the United Kingdom's future with the European Union has already been set out successfully in the manifesto on which the government was elected. At the heart of the negotiations is to be a comprehensive free trade agreement, along the lines of the free trade agreements already agreed by the EU in recent years with Canada and other friendly countries. If the government is unable to negotiate a satisfactory outcome, it will attempt to mimic the EU's relationship with Australia. Australia has traded with the EU via a partnership, and in 2018, negotiations for a free trade agreement between Australia and the EU opened up. But as yet, no formal structure or agreement has been concluded. In effect, their relationship is pretty basic, and based on the very core blocks of WTO rules. This, however, is something we've heard before in Johnson's Greenwich speech and elsewhere. What's immediately striking is that the document goes above and beyond what we already know. In the first instance, while the government notes that the political declaration remains the basis for the agreement, the new document observes that every area does not need to be incorporated into a treaty. Many policy areas are for the UK government to determine within a framework of broader friendly dialogue and cooperation. They do not require an institutionalised relationship. What comes next is quite significant and requires a bit of backstory. Negotiations are set to be conducted in rounds, with the political declaration laying down the groundwork for a high-level meeting to take stock of progress, with the aim of agreeing actions to move forward in negotiations on the future relationship. So far, so good. What the UK government has now said is if at this June meeting, a broad outline of an agreement which could be rapidly finalised by September has not been agreed, the government will need to decide whether the UK's attention should move away from the negotiations and focus solely on continuing domestic preparations to exit the transition period in an orderly fashion. In other words, if an agreement's not in place by June, the government would consider walking away from negotiations. But anyway, and without getting too technical, what is the government looking for in the main bulk of the Comprehensive Free Trade Agreement? i.e., what are the predominant economic parts of this agreement? Well, when it comes to goods, they're looking for liberalised market access, ensuring that there are no tariffs, fees, charges and quantitative restrictions on trade in manufactured and agricultural goods, as well as ensuring streamlined customs arrangements covering all trade in goods, minimising the administrative burden on traders. And when it comes to services, the government is looking at achieving a balanced and reciprocal market access that will cover a substantial section of sectors in the UK and EU. The document goes further as well, delving into other agreements to supplement the Comprehensive Free Trade Agreement, notably agreements on fisheries, aviation, energy, mobility and social security, participation in union programmes, nuclear cooperation, law enforcement and judicial cooperation, asylum and illegal migration, and security of information. So let's start with fishing. It's clear that the UK wants to disassociate itself from the common fisheries policy, In fact, the very first line of the fisheries section of the report states that the UK is ready to consider an agreement on fisheries that reflects the fact that the UK will be an independent coastal state at the end of 2020. The government does not, however, put out any specific policies when it comes to the future of fisheries, again simply stating that there ought to be an annual negotiation on access. In aviation, the UK is aiming for both a comprehensive air transport agreement and a bilateral aviation safety agreement, which would together enable UK and EU airlines to fly between the UK and EU without imposing any unnecessary restrictions on ownership. An issue that prompted the International Airlines Group, the owner of British Airways, back in 2019 to impose a limit on share purchases from outside the EU, to comply with EU regulations on foreign ownership and control. On energy, the UK has a number of electricity interconnectors, physical links allowing transfer between the European mainland and British Isles. The document does note that domestic preparations have been undertaken to allow trade over the interconnections with or without future agreements on the likes of carbon pricing, technical cooperation, and climate change policies. When it comes down to participation in union programmes, the UK is ready to consider standard third country participation in certain union programmes, where it's in the UK's and EU's interests, including the likes of Horizon Europe, the EU's research programme, Copernicus, the EU's Earth observation programme, and Erasmus, on a time-limited basis. On nuclear cooperation, the UK is looking to build on existing safeguards, allowing for cooperation between the EU and UK on safety matters, nuclear non-proliferation, long-term civil nuclear research, and the supply of medical radioisotopes and other information sharing. For law enforcement and judicial cooperation, the UK wishes to facilitate police and judicial cooperation, equipping operational partners with capabilities that help protect the public and bring criminals to justice, as well as promoting the security of all our citizens. Notably through the continued exchange of criminal records, DNA, fingerprints, vehicle registration data, passenger details, and real-time alerts on missing or wanted persons. However, the document is clear that this cooperation has distinct limits. The UK is not seeking to participate in the European arrest warrant. Instead, fast-track extradition agreements should be made. How this specifically works in the light of the Northern Irish border and the Common Travel Area, which allows people to cross between the Republic of Ireland, part of the EU, and thus part of the European arrest warrant, into Northern Ireland, out of the EU, and set to be out of the European arrest warrant, remains unknown. On asylum and illegal immigration, the government states that it's made a specific commitment to seek to negotiate a reciprocal agreement for family reunion of unaccompanied children seeking asylum. Finally, on the security of information, the government has extended its arm out to the EU, offering to negotiate an agreement if the EU requires it. Among other further commitments to civil judicial cooperation and equivalence, the government, in order to maintain continued free flow of personal data from the EU to the UK, will seek adequacy decisions from the EU under both the General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR, and the Law Enforcement Directive, before the end of the transition period. This, however, is separate from the wider future relationship. With this document, we now have a much clearer picture of what the UK actually wants from negotiations. Whether they actually can get everything they want is another matter entirely, with the EU already stating on several occasions that a Canada-style free trade deal would be incompatible with the UK's close geographical position. If you want us to explore potential flare points between the UK and EU's negotiating standpoints, be sure to comment down below. You can also get involved in the conversation over on Discord. There's a link to our server down below, and by joining, you can take part in discussions about all kinds of topics, from US politics and their 2020 election, to gaming and philosophy. Join the approaching 2,000 people on the server today, who are discussing a variety of topics from a variety of perspectives. You can also discuss our videos, and if you're a patron, you can access super exclusive bonus channels where you can talk to Team TLDR and other patrons. You can check out the Discord by clicking the link in the description. We'll be sure to keep you up to date with any developments as they happen, and with negotiations set to start next week, it almost certainly won't be long until we have to. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you want more updates as we release further videos on the negotiations, and hit the bell icon to be notified every time we release a video. As I mentioned at the start, you can find us across Facebook, Twitter, Patreon and Instagram simply by searching for TLDR News. Special thanks to our Patreon backers whose support makes these videos possible.